everyone. My name is Tom Fielder and I am one of the directors and CTO for local software engineering firm Switchplane. So at Switchplane we build custom software. So that could be apps, smartphone apps, web apps, integrations with legacy systems, well, integrations with modern systems for that matter. In fact, that's easier. But you get the idea. We make custom software. But the software is almost a byproduct, really, of what we do, because what we actually do is we help companies like yours to seek and destroy inefficiency. And we do that through software by looking at your processes and figuring out how we can optimize away manual process, looking at how we can make things more efficient, potentially through automation. That could be semi-automation, fully automation, or even just bringing order to some kind of chaos. So yeah, we help businesses to seek and destroy that inefficiency, and that helps them to scale their business. So if you're hitting those kind of scalability issues, then that's what we can help with. So we all know that Industry 4 is well upon us, and the ceiling is changing. There is an Industry 5, 6, 7. Where's it going to end? So we all know that we've got this message from on high to digitize. You've got to do more with less, not the other way around. But when I speak with businesses like yours, it's never a question of why should we do this. Everyone's on board, right? Everyone understands we need to digitize because it's going to make us more efficient, it's going to make us essentially improve our bottom line, and it's going to help us with those squeezes on the margin. So there's never any kind of aversion to it. It's more about a how. How can we actually go about doing this? Because we work with some pretty legacy systems, and it's very, very difficult to marry up this digital world with the real world. So how do we actually go about doing that? But the actual question that I think is more important than the how is how can you do it sustainably for your business? Because you're all running businesses, you've got to make money. So this message from on high saying, right, you've got to digitize, that's great, but you don't want to bankrupt yourselves overnight by going through this process of digitization. So how do you do it in a way that's sustainable? And what I might mean by sustainable is that you can sustain your business. You need to make money. And so you need to approach digitization and leverage the power of AI in a way that makes sense for business. So, like I say, it's not a case of why, it's how. And what I find is that businesses, they're not ready. I've been to visit some of you in the room and many other manufacturers. And a lot of them, you're not ready yet for the full-blown sort of AI solution. You're not ready for flying cars and all this other kind of crazy stuff. We're not there yet. It's fine to have those pie-in-the-sky type images in your mind, but we're not there yet. We've got a lot of groundwork to do. And that's the digitization, this concept of creating a digital twin of your factory, of your business, capturing data from every single thing that you do, funneling it somewhere so that AI and digitization software can help you. So Jim did talk a little bit about the back office systems, and that's exactly the kind of thing that we can help with, where you've got your back office systems and you've got processes that are just seemingly taking forever to manage. But so eradicating those kind of long-winded processes. So I just want to get a feel for where people are at, different businesses. So how many are sort of just getting started with digitization? Anyone? Okay, so nobody's getting, okay. Paul is getting started with digitization. Lovely. And how many have already started or have already got some projects done, complete? Okay, some, yeah, we've got some, yeah. And so how many people would consider themselves at a point where they're leveraging AI? So Paul's leveraging AI and lots of sort of empty space in between. Basically, Paul is doing everything. Yeah, ChatGPT is AI. Yes, it's a very useful tool, and if people aren't using that, they absolutely should be. Okay, so what I want to talk about is a strategy, first of all, because we want to leverage the power of AI. AI is absolutely the future, and it really will become your best employee. So how can we do that? How can we actually leverage it? So what I want to very quickly run through is the strategy that we at Switchplane follow when we're meeting businesses like yours to help you to identify which processes you should tackle first. Okay, so this is the strategy that we follow to let you do this in a sustainable way. So step 0, if you like, because I put through all my steps and then I realised there's actually probably this step 0. So step 0 is you've got to start small. So think small. You will have heard of these terms of being lean, being agile, and I'm sure some of you are implementing some of these practices already. But the point is you've got to start small. Look at your next smallest problem. And the reason for that is because it gives you a small, tangible solution that you can work towards. And it gives you a taste. It gives you that experience to learn how this process of digitization is going to work for you and for your business, because all of your businesses are the same. Are the same, but have unique components. So I was having this conversation earlier where we've got Viking Pump, who produce pumps, and we've got HMD, who also produce pumps, but actually they're very, very different. So they have very different processes. So think small, start small. So step 1 is actually you got to map out your processes, okay? Think about the processes in your business. You don't need to go into extraneous detail, just think through your business from start to finish. Gradually sort of mapping out those processes in your mind, figuring out what it is that you actually do. Usually there's some sort of pain point. When I come and speak to people, there's usually some kind of painful process in the business. It's not necessarily the best place to start, but it's a good conversation starter. So map out your processes in your mind. Once you've got those processes kind of mapped out, it's time to categorize. So at Switchplane, we like to use these 3 categories. So they are processes or tasks that are complex or sensitive. Okay, so that could be where you've got a high-skilled individual, they need to do a task. You absolutely could not trust a new graduate with that task, right? Or it could be sensitive data. So financial data or supply chain data, whatever it is, those complex or sensitive processes. You've got repetitive processes. So repetitive is whatever means repetitive to you, whatever that means to you and your business. You'll have a feel for what feels like this is repetitive. Once every 5 minutes, once every hour, once every day, week, whatever. Put it in that box, give it that tag, that category. And then you've got time-consuming tasks or processes. So you might find they're built up of sort of smaller tasks, but it doesn't really matter. Get those in your mind. Which are the ones that are time-consuming? Again, what feels time-consuming to you and your business? Now, once you've kind of categorized stuff, you can start to think about what we describe as the high-value processes. So they are the ones that are all 3 of those. So complex or sensitive, repetitive, and time-consuming. So it sounds like common sense, but until you lay it out, it's one of those things where if you don't get it framed in your mind, you're not going to see it. But actually, if you're paying a high-skilled individual a decent salary, okay, and they're doing something very complex that only they can do, they're doing it all the time, and it takes them ages, right? This is something that you can describe as high value. And if you can shave some time off of that, or make it efficient for them in some kind of way, then actually what that means is you can scale that process much more easily. So that thing that becomes painful actually becomes a strategic advantage, because if you're finding it painful, then your competitors are finding it painful. So if you can turn that into a strategic advantage, you can potentially take that market share, whatever it is, away from your competitors. Yeah? So once you've been through that process, you've targeted those high value processes, You've got to estimate the cost, if you like, of digitizing, bringing in some kind of technical solution, whether that's AI or just some software or some other solution, just even process change. You might need to involve an expert, so you can talk to people like us at Switchplane. You might have your own dev teams. It doesn't really matter. Involve the people that are in the know, because there are multiple solutions to problems. You could implement the world's finest AI to help you solve a problem. But if it's going to cost you an absolute fortune, and actually just implementing a simple software solution solves 80% of the problem, then it's a no-brainer. Start small. Once you've done that, you've got your high-value processes, and you've categorized them, and you've kind of got an idea of solutions, then you've got a score. You can score stuff. You can start thinking about the order in which you target these processes for digitization. And it gives you this idea, this return on investment. So obviously, if it's a high-value process and it's a really quick win, then you should have done it yesterday. Yeah? So they're the ones you target, because we're not looking at digitization for the short term. We are looking at digitization for the long term. You want to leverage AI. You want to leverage the power of your data. You want all of that information, and you want to be able to ask AI various questions. How many orders did we process through the factory last month? Which were the slowest? Why were they slow? AI has the power to understand your question and give you a reasonable response. It helps you, point you in the right direction. So AI and digitization is for the longer term. So the point is, you use those high value, high return on investments, the return from those, on some of the stuff that doesn't generate quite as much return. And by doing that, you start to bring up the business across the board. So none of this stuff to do with AI is going to be possible if you don't have your data in order. There are so many different examples of AI, and I literally only have 20 minutes to talk, so I can't talk about it all and the specifics. But you've got computer vision. You can scan look for quality or defects in your products. You can scan for health and safety issues. We're talking about people moving into areas where they're not wearing a hard hat. You can have systems scanning for that at any time. You've got energy management. I use AI at home. I've got a little sort of pet project going with our solar panels and stuff, where I can predict how much solar generation we're going to have, and therefore how much power management we need in the house. I'm not doing it on the scale that Paul does, the 250 kilowatts, but my 11 measly panels do generate some kind of power, especially yesterday. Brilliant day. But you can use the power of AI to get to help you solve problems. So root cause analysis. I'm sure lots of you have been involved in some really technical aspects of your business, where you've got this really complex technical documentation. And I was faced with this very problem not too long ago, where I was trying to integrate with some hardware, but the documentation was available only in French. Now, my French is okay. I can ask for a beer, and I can ask for directions to the train station. But other than that, it's pretty lacking. So what I did is I took that technical documentation, I fed it to AI, and then I started asking questions. And within about 5 minutes, I'd solved my problem. So that's the kind of thing that you can do with AI. Feed it this technical documentation, ask it questions, and it can give you decent responses, at least help you on your journey to solving those problems. But like I say, none of this stuff is possible if you haven't got your data in order. So that was kind of the strategy. I know I've rushed through it, and it's not going to be perfect for everyone, so you've got to kind of adapt it to how it works for you and for your business. But that's the kind of process that we go through to help identify how we can get on this journey. So one example that I wanted to talk about, well, I've got a couple actually, but one example that's kind of relevant to you guys in the room is that we've worked with Viking Pump just across the road. I'm sure many of you know who they are. So I can't go into huge detail exactly because it wouldn't be right. All right, so there's a lot of information I'm going to have to skip out. So you'll just have to take it a little bit on faith, some of this. But Paul Cattell has kindly said that I can talk a bit about this Atlas system that we've put together for them. So over the last few years, we've been working with them on this digitization project. And what we've produced is this web application, essentially, a digital platform where they can feed data. Now, the initial problem that we spoke to Viking about was their material traceability. So they have to prove that the quality of their products is of a certain quality. So they have to prove this through documentation. Now, it's not straightforward because they've got so many different parts that they use for assembly and materials and so on. I'm sure some of you have got the same kind of problem. The issue that they were facing was that there's so much technical documentation, and that technical documentation is only put together at the time of shipping. And I'm sure many of you can appreciate that when you come around to ship something, and you haven't got the technical documentation, oh dear, that thing's going to sit there and wait while somebody figures out what you did 3 weeks ago, which parts you used, and where the documentation is, right? Not only that, you discover you haven't got the documentation, you need to liaise with the supplier, they don't respond, so on and so forth. So, your on-time delivery stat just goes through the floor. So what we did to help them on that journey is we digitized that process. So like I say, I can't go into all of the details, but we digitized that process for them. And what they can do now is at the time of assembly, so when staff are working on the pumps, assembling there and then, they're feeding information quite easily into the Atlas system, and it's able to tell them straight away that information you've entered doesn't make sense, or we're missing documentation, and the system can then automatically, so hands-free for Viking, speak to suppliers, get the information it needs, and attach it. So by the time it comes round to shipping, all that technical documentation is already ready. It's already done. So what that has done for Viking has meant that their previous sort of full-time job of someone dealing with a complex process, a repetitive process, and time-consuming process, so a high-value process, what it's meant is that full-time role has changed into 2 to 3 hours a week. So you can do the maths and figure out what that means, but not only that, what it means for their scalability, so they can do more. So I've kind of scooted through Atlas, and like I say, so it's turned into this 2 to 3 hours a week job instead. And what that means is that employee is that high-skilled employee, they're now redeployed to more strategic growth areas, which is fantastic for Viking. So you might have similar issues, and so this kind of system can help you to solve those problems. So stepping outside of manufacturing for a minute, because I can speak a little bit more freely, because I'm assuming nobody in this room is competing with Littlewood Fencing on fencing projects. They've kindly said I can talk a little bit more about this as well. So with Littlewood, we've been working with them since about 2018. And their initial issue was how they manage invoices. Okay, every business has to deal with suppliers, and they have to deal with those invoices and paying and so on and so forth, those financial processes. So the issue that we were presented with Littlewood was that their process, if you can call it that, was just chaotic. They would receive invoices by email to various different emails, addresses. They would receive invoices by post. They would receive invoices by fax. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we had a fax machine. So yes, it was chaotic, and these things were all over the place. those invoices, when they were received, people would just guess who was responsible for them and hand them out and put them on people's desks. And obviously they stay there or they get bounced around the office. And so you can imagine, invoices would take weeks to process. And that led to a bad rep for Littlewood. Yeah, it's quite funny that they're using fax machines, but actually, the fundamental issue here is that it's a bad rep for them. And not only that, it meant that because they couldn't pay their suppliers on time, those suppliers weren't interested in doing further work until their previous work was paid for. That makes sense. It's fair enough. And that causes problems for their projects going forward. So it's actually a huge problem for their business. Now, once those invoices were kind of approved by managers, they would be bounced to the finance team, who would then scan them. So you've got an email that was printed out earlier, right, handed to a manager, and then later down the line, scanned back in. And this kind of crazy bouncing around and process was just well, you get the idea. It's absolutely mad. Now, we're talking about a scalability issue as well. So at the time, they were processing, I think, an invoice every 10 minutes, which, one invoice every 10 minutes doesn't sound like much, but I guarantee that'll, you go for your lunch break. What happens? Oh, okay, your inbox is full. There's a lot to process, and that's soul-destroying work for anyone. So that was a huge issue for them. So what we did is we looked at that process. We had a chat with people that are involved, and we introduced a way that we could digitize it. So first of all, we said that any invoice that comes in has to be associated with a purchase order. And by doing that, we're able to easily tie up incoming invoices with stuff that we've got lined up already. So we're expecting it. So we've got some data ready to go. Now, a flip side to this is that the managers had to create those purchase orders. But that's easy. So we created a system that made it easy for them. Now, it's much easier, or the managers are much more incentivized to create purchase orders because they want work. They want a supplier to do work for them. What they don't want to do is process a bunch of invoices on their desk. So the issue of delay went away, and there was no issue for the managers of creating these purchase orders. So once those purchase orders were created, suppliers do the work and they send in their invoices. Those invoices had to then come in to a digital inbox, so an unmanned email inbox. No more post, no more fax. Those were just rejected. And believe it or not, there was next to zero pushback from the suppliers because they want to get paid, right? So it's pretty straightforward. If you want to get paid, you've got to send your invoice by email to this address. That's it. No pushback. So we're instantly cutting out that process of printing stuff, bouncing around the office, trying to figure out who's responsible. The system reads those emails in real time, sends that in. If they get rejected for whatever reason, they go back to the supplier. They get sort of a bit of a blurb to say how you should resubmit, how to get your invoice into the system. So that entire process is hands-off for Littlewood, so there's no staff involved. It just completely cuts out that for them entirely. The system would then read the email and attachments. So thinking back to 2018, this is slightly before some of the availability of AI. We were using OCR. So reading the invoices, reading the emails, extracting as much data as we can. And algorithmically, so we are writing software, writing code to try and extract and try and marry up invoices to purchase orders to the people involved so that we can assign those invoices to the correct people for processing. So we had about, I think, on my notes, we had about a hit rate of about 60%. So the algorithm could pretty much figure out 60% of invoices who they should be sent to. The manager has a simple screen for processing their queue, simple as you like, straightforward. So if an invoice couldn't be allocated, there's a human process for dealing with those. So someone in the office is then responsible for manually assigning. So The finance team can then process just like they did before, do their final checks and pay. So, it went from this process of weeks, 3-4 weeks sometimes, to pay an invoice, and that reduced to sort of 2 to 3 days. So for them, not only did it cut out all of that sort of process in the office where you're printing stuff out, bouncing things around, the annoyance of having to process 100 invoices on my desk, all of that stuff just disappeared overnight. Suppliers were happy, projects weren't delayed, so the knock-on effects are huge. So what we've done since then is we've introduced an advancement to the algorithm that we put together. So we've used AI to scan the documents instead. So we've got a huge wealth of data representing previously scanned documents. So we know what some suppliers send documents through like. They use different invoice numbers, they use purchase order, or they adjust purchase order numbers for whatever reason. They do weird stuff, they use weird fonts, and sometimes there's no text at all. So we used AI to digest all of that information. And by using AI, it's able to marry up many more permutations of that data than we ever could through writing the software manually. So the AI now means that we're in this position where instead of a 60% hit rate, we're hitting 95%. That's huge, a huge jump. And it's actually a simpler solution than the algorithm that we initially had to create. So this is the power of the latest technology, and that's how we can utilize it to simplify even some of the stuff like the algorithms that we have to write for people. So, like I say, we're at this 95% hit rate, and to say that they're happy is an understatement. They're now in a position where the system has processed more than 100,000 invoices. It's processing 2 invoices every 10 minutes rather than 1. And any manual sort of invoice assignment is less than 15 minutes a day. So again, we've eradicated all of that inefficiency. We've improved the work for that individual that had to do this day in, day out. They're now strategically redeployed. So, that's a massive win for them as a business and for that employee. So, to summarize, we're looking to start small. And like I say, there's too much to try and cram into 20 minutes. But I hope you found what I have said useful. To try and figure out those processes that are high value. Talk to the people that are involved in solving those problems right now. Figure out what potential solutions might look like. See if there's a way, see if you've got any quick wins, because they're the ones that are going to really help to push you onto this journey of digitization. We are launching a service that's called Get AI Ready, which is similar to what I've talked about today, where we come and have a chat with you, look a bit more at your processes and talk about what solutions might be available to you. So, if you're interested in that, then give us a shout. Or, more than welcome to have an informal chat. I'm happy to come and check out your factories because, I'm nosy and I do like to have a look at factories. So, please, if you want an informal chat, that's fine. But yeah, I hope this has been useful. So get your data ready and then you can start leveraging the power of AI. Okay? Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
A couple of quick questions.
Yes.
So the first one is on that project you described with Little there,
yes.
The phase of understanding the process or the process mapping.
Yes.
How long did that take?
Surprisingly, not that long. So it's quite easy when you're working within your business and you're in the midst of your business. I'm sure everyone can appreciate that you're head down. You've almost got blinkers on to what's going on around you. It's not until you step out of your business or someone makes you step out. So just by the very fact of me being in the room with someone and making them talk through everything that they're doing, then it's actually, you can see the cogs going and thinking, this is crazy. Why are we printing out invoices and then scanning them later? It's almost an embarrassment at that point.
And the second question is, obviously interactions with some of the major systems that are already available. So, for example, we look at SAP and Oracle for invoice processing, purchasing, bill of materials control.
Yep.
Those type of things. Then you've got the manufacturing execution systems like Hydra, Aegis. So is it a case of you can work within those tools to take the data and provide out?
Yeah, so every business has a slightly different blend, and so there are sometimes cases where we can fit stuff at the beginning, the end of the process, or even in between. Often those systems kind of almost sit outside of the real world of what happens in the factory. So often what we've found is that those systems have data and someone is responsible for downloading that data, preparing it for the factory floor. They go away and actually do the stuff and then feed it back, and then it makes its way back to the system. So it's those kind of integration processes, either talking between systems or even just a data platform that can read that data and put it in such a way that makes it accessible to AI. So yeah, it's kind of a it depends answer, but those big systems, yes, they can have modules that bring AI into them, and that's often in the form of, like I was saying, about some kind of chat facility. So, how many orders did I have last month? Which ones were the slowest and why? And then AI is able to give you some explanation, probably because these orders all had this particular part that was involved or something like that. It's able to tie up that data for you. So yes, absolutely. And if they aren't, then quite frankly, you probably shouldn't be using that software. Yeah. So yes, the big systems, and yes, of course, they're getting on board. Everyone is getting on board. So what we're talking about is a bit more about the nuts and bolts of the real world process. So how we can tie those real world processes and feed that data back to a central system or even a system that we create. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah.